Demon Souls is incredible. Demon Souls for the PS5 is a remake of the beloved 2009 classic developed by FromSoftware. Bluepoint Games, who recently developed the Shadow of the Colossus remake 2 years ago, has done a fantastic job at remaking Demon Souls. Known for its incredible world design and punishing difficulty, Bluepoint has held back no punches and captured the essence of the original, while also adding an impressive amount of quality of life improvements to make this feel next-gen and a perfect launch title for the PS5. If you've played any of the previous Souls games, or are looking to get into the franchise, then you owe it to yourself to experience this classic. Let's begin with the largest section of this review and the most important aspect of Demon Souls, the gameplay. If you're familiar with the Souls series at all, then the basics will not be anything new to you. For the others, Demon Souls is an action RPG that heavily leans on world design and complex enemies to keep the gameplay engaging. For lack of a better term, Demon Souls doesn't give the player too many options on their side, but instead have to figure out how to best deal with their opponent. These enemies are typically quite difficult, or at the very least demand patience, otherwise they can and will kill you very quickly. This also strongly applies for bosses, who are the final challenge for the player in any given area. Core to the Souls experience is difficulty, and like the original, Demon Souls is a very hard game. At the beginning at least. I'd say its contemporaries are far more challenging, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I got stuck in multiple areas. This was due to my first playthrough where I chose a regular strength build and used the bastard sword, but the game felt horrible to play like this. I constantly felt underpowered. This was due to weapons being wall magnets, constantly hitting the environment and cancelling my attack. On top of that, so many enemies would attack faster than I could swing my weapon, and to my knowledge, Demon Souls doesn't have a poise system, so I would get staggered over and over again. Restarting with a faster build really showed me that the game is not very well balanced, regardless of build. Once I finished the Tower Knight, I completed the entire Mining Archstone, which provided a good challenge, but once I started playing the remaining 3 Archstones, I never got challenged again. Maybe this is my fault for brute forcing through an entire Archstone, but it really shows you how the game cannot be balanced properly when all the areas become available at the same time, because they all need to be roughly the same difficulty. I mean, just look at how easy I'm taking down some of these late game bosses. After the Dragon God, which is the final boss in the Mining Archstone, I don't actually think I ever died to another boss again. Akin to every other Souls game, ranged weapons and more so magic are completely overpowered. Enemies tend to have really low defense against magic, and the AI can't really handle being hit from out of melee range. Magic builds are really fun, but you'll tend to kill everything before they get a chance to attack you. At best, you'll have a smile on your face. At worst, there won't be much of a challenge. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell and what I've researched so far, there is no way to respec your character, so plan your build accordingly. Everything you've heard me say about gameplay so far has been copy and pasted from the original, which isn't bad at all. The original is great and so is the remake. What has been added is brand new animations across the board. Enemies, weapons, cutscenes, player movement, and so on. The animations Bluepoint have created here are incredible. They look fucking badass. Just look at this. Please, nobody underplay how great and how much of an improvement new animations are to a combat system. This one update would have been enough to make the gameplay feel fresh to returning players, but Bluepoint have absolutely crushed it with the addition of the Dualsense 5. The amazing adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, and improved controller speaker are all on display here, and my god, what an incredible addition to gameplay these are. Every time your weapon makes contact with anything, the controller will do such a subtle vibration, or when an enemy's weapon clashes against your metal shield, you get a great idea of what it would really feel like. When you're using a bow and slowly press down the trigger, you feel it tighten as if you're pulling the string back yourself. There's also a really cool detail, that if you slowly let go, an animation will play of your character releasing the arrow. Unfortunately, if you hammer down the trigger too quickly, the adaptive force won't have time to kick in. I think they need to enable the resistance earlier. It's not a big issue though. Unfortunately, while the animations are great and the feedback you get when backstabbing an enemy never gets old, you will notice while doing this the enemies are so easy to cheese when it comes to backstabs, and in general to be honest. These guys are incredibly dumb. This has always been an issue in Souls when versing a humanoid enemy, but it's excessive here. You can really tell this is something that is 11 years old and not very next gen. Unlike any other Souls game, Demon Souls introduces the world tendency system, which is actually really complex and doesn't do a very good job explaining it to the player. Basically, the TLDR version is the more you die in human form or kill NPCs, your world will start to turn black, and will become harder. More difficult enemies will start to spawn in certain areas because of this. To counteract this, every time you kill a boss, the world will be pushed to white, and things will become easier. Once you've hit pure white tendency on a particular archstone, some new areas will open up. Some final gameplay gripes. Like a lot of other great games, there's a useless inventory system. Why is there an overall weight limit when you can just send your items back to the storage from out in the world? If they did this to balance healing, why not just put a cap on the amount of healing you can have equipped? I mean, they've already done that, it just feels like they're double dipping in useless mechanics. Demon's Souls also has this vaulting mechanic, where you can vault over low railings or get up some drops, but it's never consistent enough to know what can and cannot be vaulted. You just have to try everything to see if it works or not. That's the gameplay section completed. While most of it is incredible with some great improvements, Bluepoint was a little too faithful to the original in some aspects. The most obvious difference when it comes to any remake is the visual update, and Demon's Souls is no exception. This is one of the best looking games ever created and a true showcase for what to expect with the next generation of gaming. Before we get too far into this section, I just want to mention that the footage you are seeing was recorded at 1080p using the PlayStation 5's internal recording software and also being compressed by YouTube. So just know that the actual game looks 10 times better than what is being shown. This is going to sound really cliche, but there were multiple times I had to stop and just take in the environments because of how gorgeous everything looks. The lighting, textures, draw distance, color palette, and everything else is just breathtaking. It's absolutely incredible. I've heard a lot of people say they're disappointed with the updated art style, but I couldn't disagree more. I love what Bluepoint has done here. It does look a lot more realistic than the original, which went for a bit more of a cartoony look, something that future games would also drop. I think the best example to show with this is with the Vanguard, the game's first boss. Looking at the original, he looks really goofy, and I don't think that would have translated very well with the higher fidelity. Even if you do prefer the original art style, you can't deny how amazing this looks. One thing I do think the original did better though was the color palette. Don't get me wrong, the default look here is really good, but thankfully Bluepoint Games has added a ton of graphical options, and one of them is a visual filter which lets you choose the color palette of the original, as well as many others. This is something Bluepoint had in the Shadow of the Colossus remake, and I wish more games added this as an option. The other graphical options are a choice between Cinematic Mode, which renders at 4K 30fps, and a Performance Mode, which renders at 1440p and runs at a solid 60fps. You have a motion blur slider and a film grain option, which are both really nice things to have, especially being able to adjust the motion blur. I'm loving that console games are adding this as an option. Demon's Souls also introduces a photo mode, which I believe is the first in the Souls series and has a great amount of options. It's nothing groundbreaking, I still think Ghost of Tsushima has the best photo mode of any game, but this is a great addition. Speaking of the camera, Bluepoint has added a new camera which sits lower to the ground to make it more realistic and aims to not get stuck on as many walls, but it doesn't really do a good job of that. This camera is still a massive hassle, and in a lot of tight areas you will easily activate first person mode briefly. However, if you prefer the original camera, you can also play with that one as well. Lastly, regarding visuals and presentation is the brand new character creator. This thing is fantastic and easily a massive upgrade over the original. Continuing on with the presentation is the updated sound design and music. Like everything else thus far, these things are amazing. Combat has never sounded so good. Whether it's something loud like metal clashing against metal or subtle like footsteps in a puddle, Demon's Souls is an absolute joy to listen to. Bluepoint has added some great little touches to the sound design as well. Every time you kill something and you hear the wisp of you collecting their souls, or the fire on your sword being affected by the wind, it all sounds great. Voice acting is also fantastic, and somehow Bluepoint managed to track down all the original voice actors and get them to reprise their roles. This is something I really admire.
And be remembered as a hero.
Something else returning players will notice immediately is that the characters have lip sync now, which is a really nice addition. To my knowledge, the music is also new, but has the cadence of the original tracks. I'm indifferent on which soundtrack is better, but I think they're both fantastic. My favourite part of the score has to be in the Nexus. It's very soothing and really captures the essence of a relaxing place, devoid of the stress and anxiety the rest of the game puts on the player. The next couple paragraphs will be a bit shorter because nothing has really changed from the original game, for better and worse. Map design has been a core pillar of the Souls franchise, and Demon's Souls was the perfect starting point. Most of the worlds give off the impression that you're slowly delving deeper into these maze-like puzzles that join back on themselves at unexpected times. My favourite area in the whole game has to be the Boletarian Palace. While it's the first main area in the game, I think it perfectly captures what the level design was trying to achieve. It may not be the most complex area Demon's Souls has, but to me it's constantly visually impressive and has a good amount of shortcuts. There are some areas that are great but visually look so samey the entire time, the most obvious being the Tower of Latria. I know it's trying to confuse the player, but every hallway looks the same as the next, and the distance between the Archstone and the boss is a mile past the point of ridiculous. I feel bad for anyone that has to do this multiple times. Also, fuck the Valley of Defilement. This area is the descent to Blighttown, but so much worse. If you miss an incredibly important shortcut, you'll hate this area. Like every other Souls game, there's some great levels and some mediocre ones. While I wish every level was fantastic, I would still take the worst Demon's Souls has to offer over most other games. Time for what I think will be the most controversial part of the review, the bosses. This is probably the most mixed bag of bosses, tied with Dark Souls 2. Although I can forgive Demon's Souls a little bit more because it was the first to try this, but I cannot deny I wish Bluepoint had redesigned a lot of these. I'll start with the negative first. Many bosses feel like they're animatronic robots who have no intellectual thoughts. With the Vanguard, just stay behind him and he will constantly do his jump attack, which leaves him open for a few hits. Run behind him again and do the same thing until he dies. This same tactic works with the Adjudicator. Stay behind him while he does his one swing attack and then attack his stomach. Wait for him to fall over and attack his head. Rinse and repeat. I could give a lot more examples like this, such as the Tower Knight or Leechmonger. Worst of all is the Dragon God boss fight. This is a huge disappointment and probably the worst boss in the game. If I want a Bluepoint to change any of the bosses, this would have been top of the list. But now I want to talk about the better boss fights, which Demon's Souls does have some good ones. Flamelurker, for the most part, is a great fight, just as long as you're not a heavy strength build. He's fast and has a good amount of attacks, which you need to remember, and even a powered up stage when he starts glowing with fire. The duels with the late game bosses are definitely the peak of these fights. Penetrator, Old Hero, and Old King Allant are all fantastic, if not a little easy. Much like Dark Souls 2, Demon's Souls has a real mixed bag when it comes to bosses, but it doesn't ruin the experience. It just makes me wish Bluepoint decided to update some of them. And that's just about everything for Demon's Souls. It's an amazing game with some incredible high points and a few downsides, but nothing that ruins the experience. Here's a few things I couldn't really fit into the review. The load times are insane with an average wait time of around 4 seconds. No more annoying 30-second load times between areas or frustration waiting to try again on a boss. It took me just over 9 hours to beat the game on my first playthrough, which is a good amount of time as I'm quite experienced with Souls games. For newcomers, you'll easily get 20 plus hours on your first playthrough. For anyone wondering about replayability, Demon's Souls has no shortage of that. With New Game Plus, Fractured Mode, which flips the whole game horizontally, even the cutscenes, and multiple different builds to try out, you could easily do 3, 4, or 5 playthroughs before getting bored. Like I mentioned earlier, some builds are a lot weaker than others, and each world's enemies have different resistances. The mining world is a slog for anyone trying to use anything other than piercing weapons or magic. Upgrading your weapons is also really convoluted with all the different upgrade shards there are. If you want a plus 10 weapon at all, you'll have to do some grinding. As for the technical performance, I played in performance mode 99% of the time, only changing to cinematic mode for visual comparisons, and I can happily say performance mode never dropped below 60 FPS. Demon's Souls is a great game and definitely one of the best console launch titles of all time. What Bluepoint was able to achieve here is nothing short of amazing, and I think FromSoftware should be incredibly proud of them. Thanks for watching my review. If you liked it, maybe think about subscribing. If you have a PS5 or are going to get one, I cannot recommend Demon's Souls enough, even with the price increase of next-gen games. My next review will be on the console itself, along with Astro's Playroom, which comes with the console.